Pastor Doug, do you believe that Project 2025 will bring in Sunday's law?
The language I read in Project 2025, you maybe have heard the expression a nothing burger. I read it over and over again. I know people made a lot out of that, but if everything, first of all, the president doesn't have to follow anything that the Heritage Foundation is a think tank. He doesn't have to follow anything that they come up with. There's suggestions. Democrats have got the Council on American Progress. They've got their think tank. Republicans have their think tank. They come up with platform ideas. And there was something in there about protecting the time to worship on Sunday, or it says for some this would be Saturday. It was really protections for workers so that you either get extra time, extra payment. I didn't see that as a law compelling anybody to worship on that day. So if they're going by that, I didn't see the Sunday law that is compelling you to worship on that day in that language. I just have to be honest.
Okay.
But you know, whenever you see the word Sunday and law in the same paragraph, it gets people pretty excited.
It does.
Who will establish the mark of the beast? What is the image of the beast? And we will look into the past about the Sunday law, blue laws. And what were the regulations of the blue laws? The next question that we'll be looking or trying to answer is, what is the test for God's people? So there were some things that did change my mind in regards to the Sunday law of how it was going to be played out. And I think many of us can be caught in this thought and miss out what in reality is the Sunday law and how it is to play out. And I think there is danger because, like in this presentation that we just saw, this clip, you say it's a nothing burger, it's not a big deal. But if we go and cover these questions right here, or these points, I think we're going to see, or we will have a different perspective about this statement. It's a nothing burger. So in order to know who will establish the mark, we need to know who is the beast, right? In prophecy of beast, for example, we just recently went through a study of Daniel 11. A beast signifies a power, a government. So a beast is not necessarily a person, but an organization or government. So we're going to jump to Revelations chapter 13, and we're going to look into certain details that we're going to be looking at in this chapter. And I beheld another beast coming up out of the earth, and he had two horns like a lamb, and he spake as a dragon. And he exercises all the power of the first beast before him, and causeth the earth and them which dwell therein to worship the first beast, whose deadly wound was healed. So here we see a mention of another beast. And this beast comes out of the earth. And the description given is like a lamb. And he exerciseth all the power of the first beast. So this one comes out of the earth. Where does the first beast come out of? Verse number 1, and I stood upon the sand of the sea, and I saw a beast rise up out of the sea, having 7 heads, 10 horns, and upon his horns 10 crowns, and upon his heads the name of blasphemy. Now theirs is a similar description of this beast given in Revelation chapter 17, and we read in verse number 3. So he carried me away in the spirit into the wilderness, and I saw a woman sit upon a scarlet-colored beast, full of name of blasphemy, and what else? 7 heads and 10 horns. So it's the same description. Names of blasphemy, having 7 heads and 10 horns. But this, he saw a woman sitting upon this beast. So we need to discover what does the sea means in which this beast is over. the prophecy continues to tell us in verse 15, and he saith unto me, the waters which thou sawest, where the whore sitteth, are peoples, multitudes, and nations, and tongues. So we could see that this is an area where there's different nationalities, different tongues or languages. Let's move on or go back to chapter 13, verse 5, because we're going to see that this power was given a certain time. And I'm just refreshing what we've seen about this beast. And there was given unto him a mouth speaking great things and blasphemies, and power was given unto him to continue 42 months. So the beast in Revelation 11 that came out of the earth has to come or around about when there was this persecution that the first beast had for 42 months. And we saw that the 42 months initiated in the year 538 and ran down to the year 1798. So sometime in that time frame, towards the end, this beast in verse number 11, and I beheld another beast coming up out of the earth, and he had 2 horns like a lamb. So sometime there was a nation that was rising that was young, because a lamb with horns is very young. A very young animal. So it gives a description of its youth and its rising. They say a lamb usually has its horn come out about a year old. So it's at a very early age. So those are the description. It is a nation that is young, and it's a nation that is coming up sometime towards the end of the 42-month prophecy of the first beast. And he says, spake like a dragon. So next there needs to be some country that has a similar application and find a fulfillment in some nationality, which is the representative of still another great system of religion. Because the first beast was a system of religion that persecuted, and this other beast has to have some similarity that will create or have some influence over the nation. Let's go to chapter 12 so we could get some other descriptions in regards to this. And to the woman were given 2 wings of a great eagle, that is God's people, fleeing persecution, that she might flee into the wilderness. Keep this word in your mind, okay? Wilderness. The woman fleeing into the wilderness, into her place where she is nourished for a time and times and a half a time, and from the face of the serpent. And the serpent cast out of his mouth waters as a flood, after the woman, that he might cause her to be carried away of the flood. So here is a symbolic, and we see that waters or seas is some meaning of people, nation, tongues. And this dragon opened its mouth, or the serpent opened its mouth to try to grab the woman, right? But the woman fled into the wilderness for a safe place. Okay? So wilderness, this woman fled into the wilderness. The second beast comes out of the earth. Let's continue. And the earth helped the woman. And the earth opened her mouth and swallowed up the flood which the dragon cast out of his mouth. And the dragon was wroth with the woman and went to make war with the remnant of her seed, which keep the commandments of God and have the testimony of Jesus Christ. So what nation was rising during this persecution in which the woman fled into the wilderness? We're going to see. So the earth helps the woman. It swallows up the flood which the dragon cast out, right? Now let's go to verse 12 of chapter 13 of Revelation. And he exerciseth all the power of the first beast before him, and causes the earth and them which dwell therein to worship the first beast, whose deadly wound was healed. So this second beast that comes out of the earth causes the earth and all of them to worship the first beast. And he exercises the powers in front or in the side of the first beast. So we're going to see that there was an acknowledgement of a persecution by the Catholic Church. Pope John Paul II, back in 2000, asked for forgiveness for what the church did, for the persecutions of hatred towards those it considered heretics that were not abiding or believing in their dogmatic beliefs. Another thing that happened during this time, during the Roman Empire, is that we had the history say something about Constantine. It says the Roman Emperor Constantine I, a convert to Christianity, introduced the first civil legislation concerning Sunday in 321, when he decreed that all work should cease on that day, except that farmers could work if necessary. That law, aimed at providing time for worship, was followed later in the same century and subsequent centuries by further restrictions on Sunday activities. Something to point out. Was there a law enacting Sunday rest by Constantine? Yes, it was. Did it close everything at the time? Not necessarily, because it allowed certain people to work. Yet there was a law, but there was exemptions. Okay? There were exemptions in this law. People were allowed to work, especially in the field. Even though the law said cease to work on Sunday, he still allows certain group of people to work. Now, we're going to look into history so we could detect what else demonstrated authority over pagan Rome, which later on switched to papal Rome. Here is a doctrinal catechism. This is by Reverend Stephen Keenan. This was published, according to this article, New York, 1848. And on page 174, we read the following. Have you any other way of proving that the church has power to institute festivals of precept? The answer, has she not such power, she could not have done that in which all modern religionists agree with her. She could not have substituted the observance of Sunday, the first day of the week, for the observance of Saturday, the seventh day, a change for which there is no scriptural authority. Here's another one, plain talk about Protestantism of today. In page 225, we find the following. It is worth its while to remember that this observance of the Sabbath, in which, after all, the only Protestant worship consists, not only has no foundation in the Bible, but it is in flagrant contradiction with its letter, which commands rest on the Sabbath, which is Saturday. It was the Catholic Church which, by the authority of Jesus Christ, has transferred this rest to the Sunday in remembrance of the resurrection of our Lord. Thus, the observance of Sunday by the Protestants is an homage they pay, in spite of themselves, to the authority of the church. So it's laying out, basically, there's no scripture, and they, by them observing this, they acknowledge the authority of the church. So pagan Rome to papal Rome, there is a distinction of authority. Besides not believing into their dogmatic beliefs, which are not scriptural, they also say, here is another example in which proves that we have the authority. Because Protestants and even nations, they call about the Sunday as a day of rest, which there is no scriptural backing, but is only by the authority of the Catholic Church, which they admit. So let's continue to look at the second beast, because it says the following. And he doeth great wonders, so that he maketh fire come down from heaven on the earth in the sight of men, and deceive them that dwell on the earth. by the means of those miracles which he had power to do in the sight of the beast, saying to them that dwell on the earth that they should make an image to the beast which had the wound by a sword and did live. So now the other characteristic is to make an image to the beast. We've seen the characteristic of the first beast, which persecuted those who do not believe in them, in their teachings, dogmatic teachings. And one of them, showing authority, like we just read, is about Sunday. So now this other nation is to replicate what the first beast did inside or in front of the first beast. So the image of the beast, this is what they want to do. They said, let us make, or that they should make an image to the beast. Let's go to determine or look at another characteristics in which reflects what this power does. So remember, keep in mind, this beast does these miracles inside of or in front of the first beast. Now let's go to chapter 19 to see another characteristic. And the beast was taken, and with him the false prophet that wrought miracles before him, with which he deceived them that had received the mark of the beast and them that worshipped his image. These both were cast alive into a lake of fire burning with brimstone. So another description, instead of saying the first beast or the second beast that came out of the earth, is now described as a false prophet, because it does miracles before him, before the beast. And what else do we see? And I saw 3 unclean spirits like frogs come out of the mouth of the dragon, and out of the mouth of the beast, and out of the mouth of the false prophet. So the question is, who is the dragon? Well, according to Revelation 12, that persecuted that child that was to be born was the empire, the Roman Empire. That's pagan Rome. They had many deities. Dragon, symbolism of paganism. Second is the beast. The first beast that came out of Revelation 13, that's papal Rome. Remember the 42 months. So the question remains, who is the false prophet? Or what is a false prophet? Let us begin with that. What determines a false prophet? Beloved, believe not every spirit, but try the spirits whether they are of God, because many false prophets are gone out into the world. And how are we to test them? To the law and to the testimony. If they speak not according to this word, it is because there is no light in them. So if they speak contrary to the word of God, that is one thing or a clue for us to know whether they are true or false prophets. So, a little review. Woman goes to the wilderness, right? It's a land prepared for her. Earth swallows the waters that came out of the dragon's mouth. So the land which it fled, it helped her. A beast like a lamb with 2 horns comes out of the earth. Sometime during the Roman Catholic persecution, which is the first beast, and the beast out of the earth, or false prophet, performs great wonder and miracles before the first beast. So where should we locate this nation that was on the rise? With less population, an area that was helping the woman, which was fleeing persecution. And let us not forget that part, fled into the wilderness. The woman fled into the wilderness. And then there's also the 3 unclean spirits, right? The dragon, which is paganism, the beast, papal Rome, and we're trying to identify who is the beast or the false prophet. Now here we're going to see something very interesting. This is about America, the United States. Religion and the founding of the American Republic. What does this say here in the Library of Congress? Important details that were brought up in the scriptures. Many of the British North American colonies that eventually formed the United States of America were settled in the 17th century by men and women who, in the face of European persecution, refused to compromise, passionately held religious convictions, and fled Europe. The woman fled, right? The New England colonies, New Jersey, Pennsylvania, and Maryland were conceived and established as plantations of religion. Some settlers who arrived in these areas came for secular motives to catch fish, as one New Englander put it, but the great majority left Europe to worship God in the way they believed to be correct. They enthusiastically supported the efforts of their leaders to create a city on a hill or a holy experiment, whose success would prove that God's plan for his churches, the woman fleeing, could be successfully realized in the American wilderness. Remember that word in the Bible? Fled into the wilderness. And God helped his people. Here, Library of Congress mentioning that. Even colonies like Virginia, which were planned as commercial ventures, were led by entrepreneurs who consider themselves militant Protestants and who worked diligently to promote the prosperity of the church. So now we're getting some evidence, seems to be pointing out to North America, the United States. Where does the United States stand? First, remember the Catholic, that was the system that was used to persecute God's people. Now we need to look for a system that is very strong in the United States. Protestantism. We read here, Protestantism, Christian religious movement that began in Northern Europe in the early 16th century as a reaction to medieval Roman Catholic doctrines and practices. Along with Roman Catholicism and Eastern Orthodoxy, Protestantism became one of the three major forces in Christianity. After a series of European religious wars in the 16th and 17th centuries, and especially in the 19th century, it spread throughout the world. Wherever Protestantism gained a foothold, it influenced the social, economic, political, and cultural life of the area. So what system could that be with the two horns that this beast is? Could it be Protestantism? So that would be one, right? Because it influenced over these areas, but it has two horns. What would the other horn be? A little article about Protestantism by the Arizona State University. At 500, Protestant Reformation still influencing our world. This is no doubt something is secret. Protestantism is a strong influence in the United States. Another point we're going to see is that there was an old world and the church or the woman fled into the new world. American wilderness. This land indeed helped many believing or Christian believing people fleeing from persecution. But there's another thing that also stands out about this nation. America is a republic, not a democracy. The Supreme Court declares America is a Christian nation. So now let's look at history in regards to this nation. It's to make an image to the beast. So let us transport back in time in 1893. We read from the General Conference Bulletin. Here is an argument from a lawyer, a Judge S.B. Davis of Terre Haute, Indiana, that was sent up there and distributed by the hunters and lying in quantities on the table of the committee, in which it said, the Supreme Court of the United States says, this is a Christian nation, and goes on from this to argue for national and state recognition of Sunday. Yes, this is a Christian nation. That was the grand chief argument of all. This is a Christian nation. The Supreme Court of the United States has said so. If there are any of the brethren here who doubt whether the decision of the Supreme Court means anything, I wish they had been there and seen what it meant there. This was not an Adventist person declaring these words, but these are the words. Let me ask you this question. Has this not been brought up today by Protestants? That they say, oh, the Supreme Court has declared this is a Christian nation. Or repeating what was said back in 1893. Spirit of Prophecy says, here is a striking figure of the rise and growth of our own nation. And the lamb-like horns, emblems of innocence and gentleness, will represent the character of our government as expressed in its two fundamental principles, republicanism and Protestantism. The Christian exiles who first fled to America sought an asylum from royal oppression and priestly intolerance, and they determined to establish a government upon the broad foundation of civil and religious liberty. These principles are the secret of our power and prosperity as a nation. Millions from other lands have sought our shores, and the United States has risen to a place among the most powerful nations of the earth. Republicanism and Protestantism. This is what the second beast was referring to. Now, the following is a true story that the pioneers experienced in their time. 1896. During that time, there were Sunday laws. Let us read. This is from the book Thoughts on Daniel and Revelation. Up to January 1st, 1896, 90 arrests of this kind have been made. Some of them under circumstances of great oppression and cruelty, and prisoners have served an aggregate of nearly 1,500 days in jail and chain gangs. And from the windows, listen to this, and from the windows of some of these jails, these very Seventh-day keepers who were there confined in durance vile for not resting on Sunday could behold on Sundays trainloads of working men going to their labor, picnickers to their frolic, hunters to their game, and railroad cars to their traffic. But these, it is to be observed, were not keepers of the seventh day. National reformers years ago professed to smile at the oppressions of those who keep the seventh day, that their work would result in persecution. Now they only smile a little more grimly and call for stricter laws. So what do we see here? You got seventh-day keepers being put in jail for violating Sunday, but yet you have Sunday keepers working on Sunday, but we're not in jail. This is something that we should put very close attention. Remember when I was saying that made me change the way I was thinking about the Sunday law? See, the way I was thinking the Sunday law, because it's how I was taught, I was brought up, Sunday will be everything closed. No business. Just hospitals, police. And in fact, not too long ago, with my co-workers, they were like, what about football on Sundays? Oh, that will be closed too, I said. That will be closed. Well, looking at history, I was wrong. There was restrictions, but there were exemptions. But who were the ones being put in jail? Those who kept the true Sabbath day. And those who were working on a Sunday, even though there was a Sunday law, were not thrown into jail. What was it that put them in jail? Could it have been considered hate speech, anti-Christian, speaking against us, offending us? That's why it's important to look at history. Because if we don't look at history, we could be lost in track of what actually it is. Is this going to be a nothing burger, the Project 2025? But I'm starting to think that it really is going to be a big problem. Because we need to listen or read our history. So Seventh-day Adventists or Seventh-day people who kept Sabbath day and probably did some labor on Sunday were being thrown to jail. But the ones keeping or believed to observe Sunday laws, even though they worked it, were not cast into jail. Now let us see this right here. We're going to see this article from 1911 from Canada. A broadside setting of the list, the activities that were prohibited on Sundays in Ontario in 1911. Restrictions such as these helped earn Toronto, the capital of Ontario, the nicknames Toronto the Good and the Methodist Rome. Oh, why Rome? Because they were honoring Catholic Rome by establishing Sunday laws. Look at this. Sunday laws enforced in the province of Ontario prohibit labor, in big, with certain exemptions. These include the work of laborers, mechanics, and manufacturers, all farm workers, just like Constantine, such as seeding, harvesting, fencing, ditching. So there were certain exemptions. But was there a Sunday law? There was a Sunday law. But who were the ones being punished? Sabbath day keepers. Now this one, the next, is from Rhode Island. A guide to wage and workplace laws in Rhode Island. This is not back in 1800s. This is in our time. Now look at the top right. We're going to read it. Work on Sundays and holidays. Work performed on Sundays and holidays must be paid at the rate of time and 1/2 unless qualified as an exemption under General Law 25-3. Employees cannot be discharged or penalized for refusing to work on any Sunday or holiday unless they are employed by a manufacturer which operates for 7 continuous days per week. Exemptions? Did they have Sunday laws? They did. But what was the reward if they were going to work on a Sunday? Time and a half. Paid time and a half. All this under Sunday law. Now we all know what happened not too long ago, about 2 or 3 weeks, there was a new pope elected, right? A new pope elected. As I was watching, I was waiting to, they already had picked the pope, the white smoke came out. So I was waiting to see who it is, who it was, where he coming from. And comes to be an American, a newest born pope. And then I was wondering what name is he going to pick? Because when they choose a name, there is a meaning behind that. So let us pay close attention. It's in Latin, but we got subtitles. Let us look at something very interesting here.
Ho pensato di prendere il nome di Leone XIV. Diverse le ragioni, però principalmente il Papa Leone XIII, infatti, con la storica enciclica Rerum Novarum, affrontò la questione sociale nel contesto della prima grande rivoluzione industriale. E oggi la Chiesa offre a tutti il suo patrimonio di dottrina sociale per rispondere a un'altra rivoluzione industriale e agli sviluppi dell'intelligenza artificiale che comportano nuove sfide per la difesa della dignità umana, della giustizia e del lavoro.
So there are 2 things that caught my attention. One, I think, all involved about labor, right? Labor, equality, respecting, things like that. But the other thing he mentioned was the encyclical Rerum Novarum. Why was he thinking about Rerum Novarum? And he says Leo the 13th, right? He picked the name because of Leo the 13th. Well, guess when Leo the 13th was in reign? 1878 to 1903. During the pioneer times when some of them were being put in jail because of Sunday laws. Now let us read what happened in 1894, Leo the 13th. Not long afterward, Leo XIII issued an encyclical in which he commanded that all Catholics should do all in their power to cause the constitution of states and legislations to be molded on the principles of the true church. Okay, what else happened? October 18, 1893, The Jubilee in Cardinal Gibbons was held at Baltimore. The night of the 18th, Archbishop Ireland delivered a speech in which he said, I preached the most glorious crusade, church and age. Unite them in mind, in the name of humanity, in the name of God, church and age. Monsignor Sartori, the church and the age. Rome is the church. America is the age. The golden age, didn't Trump say that? We're in the golden age, and not too long ago, the Greek Orthodox Church, they even said or compared Donald Trump to Constantine the Great. These are key words for the students who listen to prophecy. God has not abandoned his children. He wants us to know where we at and how near is the end. In 1896, it follows, at a banquet the next night, Vice President Stevenson, that is of America, sat on the right hand of the cardinal. Archbishop Ireland was called upon and made another speech. At the table he said, I do not know whether or not you appreciate the full value of the union you see typified here tonight. The union of the Catholic Church and America. The fraternity between the church and the non-Catholics of the nation. The Vice President of the United States comes here and takes his seat alongside of the cardinal. The spirit of fraternity between church and state, thus typified, is the result of the work of our American cardinal. Let's continue. The policy of the Pope in view of the recent overtures in Italy is the union of the church with the great democratic powers of the future. That is America and France. This is his hope. And toward it all his remarkable energies are bent. So it stands plainly stated that all Leo's remarkable energies are bent to the union of the Catholic Church and America. 3 days later, September 24, the newspaper dispatches stated that Bishop Keene was the bearer of a rescript from Pope Leo XIII, the import of which was as follows. The papal rescript elevates the United States to the first rank as a Catholic nation. All this happened with Leo XIII, and what did Pope Leo XIV say? There was reasons why he picked his name. And what was the other thing that I said that was very interesting to me besides the labor and things? What was that encyclical? Rerum Novarum. Here it is. Rerum Novarum. And I was, we got the PDF, the technology, and I put in the search word Sunday. And bam, 2 hits about Sunday. In Rerum Novarum. This was found in section 41. From this follows the obligation of the cessation from work and labor on Sundays and certain holidays. The rest from labor is not to be understood as mere giving way to idleness, much less must it be an occasion for spending money and for vicious indulgence. As many would have it to be, but it should be rest from labor, hallowed by religion. Rest combined with religious observance disposes man to forget for a while the businesses of his everyday life, to turn his thoughts to things heavenly, and to the worship which he so strictly owes to the eternal Godhead. It is this, above all, which is the reason-errant motive of Sunday rest, a rest sanctioned by God's great law of the ancient covenant. Remember, thou keep holy the Sabbath day. And taught to the world by his own mysterious rest after the creation of man. He rested on the 7th day from all his work which he had done. But they're referring to Sunday. Let the working man be urged and led to the worship of God, to the earnest practice of religion, and among other things, to the keeping holy of Sundays and holy days. Let him learn to reverence and love Holy Church, the common mother of us all, and hence to obey the precepts of the church and to frequent the sacraments, since they are the means ordained by God for obtaining forgiveness of sin, and in Fox, leading a holy life. So this was the Rerum Novarum that Pope Leo XIV mentioned. So there's some business unfinished that he's going to try to finish. And only God knows, right? God only knows when it will happen. But there are remarks being pointed at that is going to be soon. Now let us look comparison. You know, Pastor Doug Baxter says it's a nothing burger. Well, now that we've seen how the Sunday law was played out in the past, where there was exemptions, you got the chance to pay time and a half. You know, and there were people who were not violating the Sunday or were speaking against Sunday, were being put in jail, but the Sunday keepers were working on Sunday but not put in jail. They were getting paid. Project 2025. Sabbath rest, but we're going to read towards the bullet point. Congress should encourage communal rest by amending the Fair Labor Standard Act to require that workers be paid time and a half for hours worked on the Sabbath. That day would default to Sunday, except for employers with a sincere religious observance of a Sabbath at a different time. The obligation would transfer to that period instead. Houses of worship, to the limited extent they may have FLSA covered employees. And employers legally required to operate around the clock, such as hospitals and first responders, would be exempt, as would workers otherwise exempt from overtime. Now, something that he mentioned in the video, and I could be corrected, but I just go back to it. He said employees would be given the opportunity to keep either day of rest. But what I'm reading on this document, it doesn't say employees. It says employers. See, now today, for instance, when I would be applying for a job, I will apply for a job, I will state there I cannot work Friday after sunset or Sabbath day, Saturdays. And they say, oh, we need people, we need personnel on Saturday. I need you for Saturday. I cannot work. Well, I'm sorry to say then I cannot hire you. So I would have to look for another job. So is this document, and again, from what I'm understanding, it's going to fall under the employer. Whether the employer keeps Sunday or keeps Sabbath day is going to be under his discretion. And if the employer does not give me Sabbath, I'm going to have to look for another employer who's giving me Sabbath day ready or off. So it is employers who are being protected here or are going to have to pay time and a half. Either you work on a Sunday or you work on a Sabbath day. Now, another thing that he pointed out is that the Sunday test. Well, let me tell you, I don't work on a Sunday. I've never worked on a Sunday with an employer. My previous job, they're off on weekends. They're off on Sundays. No issues, no whatsoever. So is it really a test about a Sunday? Or is it more of a test of loyalty? We're going to see that. Let's see what's going on in our time.
An opportunity last Trump, as I've been with him for 24 years, had the faith initiative an opportunity last time. But this time, he elevated it to the highest level, as you said, putting an office in the West Wing, not only symbolic, but saying, this is the office for my pastors, for my rabbis, for my people of faith. Of course, Jenny, who is the faith director, works with me hand in hand. He gave 7 to 9 staff members in the executive office. We've already established 3 task force, 2 in DOJ that we're working very closely with Secretary Bondi, 1 against anti-Semitism, 1 against anti-bias Christian, and then also a task force under our office and under domestic policy on defining religious liberty and so much more. We've had almost 500 faith leaders in just since we started. We have 8 different tenets, and if there's one thing that is the bedrock, and we saw Johnny Moore on earlier, it is religious liberty and freedom. This president is committed to people of faith. We welcome prayer and worship and open with it, but we are deeply concerned and making sure that we are fighting hard for all people of faith. As you saw people arrested simply for praying in front of an abortion clinic, and our president immediately pardoned those 23. He is hard at work, and we're honored to serve and carry out the agenda of the president and the best interest for people of faith.
So this year, they're on the move. We don't know what's going on, but inspiration lets us know what's going on. They're going to be looking at labors, task force, religious freedom, things like that. We're almost done. We read now. With rapid steps, we are approaching this period when Protestant churches shall unite with the secular power to sustain a false religion, for opposing which their ancestors endured the fierce persecution. Then will the papal Sabbath be enforced by the combined authority of church and state. There will be a national apostasy which will end only in national ruin. When is the image of the beast to be formed? We're seeing an image, but does it have life yet? That's the other question. There's an image to be formed, but that image cannot have life until life is given to it, and it will have power. We just witnessed that she's saying that is in that department that they're already working on this. So we're going to see about the image of the beast. When is the image to be formed? You claim to believe the testimonies. Let them set you right on this point. The Lord has shown me clearly that the image of the beast will be formed before probation closes, for it is to be the great test for the people of God by which their eternal destiny will be decided. So is the test about resting on Sunday or not working on that day for God's people? Is that truly the test? Question. Should not those in the southern field work on Sunday? And this is 1895. There were states with the Sunday law, okay? So states had Sunday laws. This is during that period of time. Should not those in the southern field work on Sunday? If they do this, there is danger that as soon as the opposing element can get the slightest opportunity, they will stir up one another to persecute those who do this and to pick off those whom they hate. At present, Sunday keeping is not the test. So was Sunday a test? No. Was there a Sunday law? Yes. But that was not the test. What is the test? The time will come when men will not only forbid Sunday work, but they will try to force men to labor on the Sabbath. And men will be asked to renounce the Sabbath and to subscribe to Sunday observance or forfeit their freedom and their lives. So the test is more about loyalty, not about resting on a Sunday day. Because we're going to be either tempted or persuaded to work on Sabbath day because we will get time and a half pay. And many are going to have to make a decision. Should I work if there is need, or should I not? Well, that will be the test. It's not about keeping the Sunday. Sunday is the mark of authority of the beast, but God's people, the test will be whether I will be loyal to God in keeping Sabbath day or not, or will I be persuaded to work on the Sabbath for earning those money that I probably need. This is the test that the people of God must have before they are sealed. All who prove their loyalty to God by observing His law and refusing to accept a spurious Sabbath will rank under the banner of the Lord God Jehovah and will receive the seal of the living God. Those who yield the truth of heavenly origin and accept the Sunday Sabbath will receive the mark of the beast. What need will there be of the solemn warning not to receive the mark of the beast when all the saints of God are sealed and ticketed for the new Jerusalem? O consistency, thou art a jewel. God will be there for the faithful ones, those who are loyal to him and his commandments, who keep all his commandments, including the seventh-day Sabbath, just like God wanted us to. This will be the great test. You know, when I was working through a temp agency, you're given probation for 3 months, in order to see if they hire you or not. And my 3 months were up, and I was called to the office and tell me, you're a good worker. We like how you work. I know you put that you can't work on Saturdays, but in order for us to hire you, you need to work on Saturdays. I said, I can. That's the Sabbath day. But there's some Seventh-day Adventists that work here, that work on Friday nights. And I saw one of them walking that would go to a church for the second shift Friday nights to work. And I said, well, that's them, but I can't work on a Saturday. That's the Lord's day. So he said, okay, sorry. Gave me the hand. Well, wish you good luck. Find a job, but we can't hire you. But there were other Seventh-day Adventists working on Friday nights. And some of them probably even work on Saturday. Sometimes we have the mentality, I don't work on Saturday, but I'm violating Friday nights. I'm not prepared for the Sabbath. Friday should be the day of preparation. And on Friday nights, many of us are running to the store, getting the last item, getting ready to cook on Sabbath hours Friday nights. And then we come on Sabbath morning and we think we're keeping the Sabbath day. But we are not. Because the sixth day is the day of preparation. We all know the story of Israelites fleeing Egypt, right? When he would give a portion for each day alone for that day. But for the Sabbath day, there were double portions given, and he will preserve that meal for the Sabbath day. Whereas in the other days, those who wanted to keep more for the next day was full of worms. The test is about loyalty. And God does have a controversy with his people. Because many of us believe that just by coming Saturday mornings, we're keeping the Sabbath. But what's happening during Friday after sunset? See? Look, pastors, it's a nothing burger. It's not a big deal. The reason he thinks like that is because he's not reading history. How was the Sunday law back then? There were exemptions, time and a half pay, Sunday working, some of them being put in jail for keeping Sabbath day. This is a big deal if it's passed. I saw that the two-horned beast had a dragon's mouth, and that his power was in his head, and that the decree would go out of his mouth. Then I saw the mother of harlots, that the mother was not the daughters, but separate and distinct from them. She has had her day, the 1260 years, right? And it is past. And her daughters, the Protestant sex, were the next to come on the stage and act out the same mind that the mother had when she persecuted the saints. I saw that as the mother had been declining in power, the daughters had been growing, and soon they will exercise the power once exercised by the mother. Then the Catholics bid the Protestants to go forward and issue a decree that all who will not observe the first day of the week instead of the seventh day shall be slain. And the Catholics, whose numbers are large, will stand by the Protestants. The Catholics will give their power to the image of the beast, and the Protestants will work as their mother worked before them to destroy the saints. But before their decree bring or bear fruit, the saints will be delivered by the voice of God. I saw the nominal church and nominal Adventists, like Judas, would betray us to the Catholics to obtain their influence to come against the truth. The saints then will be an obscure people, little known to the Catholics, but the churches and nominal Adventists who know our faith and customs, for they hated us on account of the Sabbath, for they could not refute it, will betray the saints and report them to the Catholics and those who disregard the institutions of the people. That is, that they keep the Sabbath in disregard. Could we have some of our fellow worshipers, Seventh-day Adventists, betray us? If they are violating the Sabbath today, and at that time they're violating the Sabbath, in order to secure some position or keep their properties or have employees, no doubt they will betray the faithful ones. But we need to keep the Sabbath just like he instituted. Just like he said we are to keep the Sabbath day. You know, there are today many Sabbath keepers on Saturday after church service. They didn't prepare their meal on the Sabbath day. Where do they go? Applebee's, Longhorns. On the Sabbath day, they go to restaurants and eat. When my father came back to the Seventh-day Adventist Church after several years of being out because of issues of testimonies, and he acknowledges, I just didn't study the Word of God, and I was weak, and I came out of the church. But now I see I need to study the Word of God, and I'm here, and I want to be obedient to him with his help. He went to the pastor and said, Pastor, I'm having this struggle. I currently have a job. I'm a cashier at a gas station. I'm having issues with that. And the pastor said, don't worry. God knows your needs. It's okay. You could work. He came to find out that the pastor also worked on Sabbath day. He would clean houses. I also, there was a time here in Nashville, a big known pastor, a beloved pastor came to Madison campus to preach. And after Sabbath, even the mayor of Madison was invited. After the Sabbath, everybody stayed for potluck. But then a few, along with the speaker, went out to a restaurant to eat on the Sabbath day. So let us not get discouraged if we happen to see that. It's very painful. It's very sad. It's very sad when we see that. And we should pray for them, and if we have a chance, speak to them. But the important thing right now is that as we're heading to this final movements, let us be sure that we are keeping the Sabbath day just like it's supposed to be. And that's including Friday after sunset. This is not a nothing burger. It is a real problem. And we got to get close to God and ask him for the strength, because we are weak. We could fall easily. We need God's strength to be loyal to him.